Sorry.
All right. So my name is Aaron Skeen. I'm one of the group members here. Everyone want to kind of introduce themselves?
I'm Jessica Montalvo. I'm from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Rob Geis. I'm from Oxford, Michigan.
I'm Rob Pettibone, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
And I'm Chelsea Bush, and I'm from Baltimore. I'm going to start with just a brief overview of the article. The article we picked, the title is Self-Management of On-Task Homework Behavior, a Promising Strategy for Adolescents with Attention and Behavior Problems. The purpose of their study was to examine the effectiveness of a 30-minute naturalistic home-based self-management and intervention for students with attention problems and behavioral disorders. And, the study design was they took baseline, and then it was the self-monitoring was our intervention that we did. And in the article, it talked about how self-monitoring is a multi-step process for observing and then recording your own behavior, which was helpful since we're all in different places. And their definition for their target behavior of on task was defined as actively or passively attending to assigned work, including writing, reading silently or aloud, looking up a word in the dictionary, looking up information on the computer, and asking relevant questions about a homework assignment. And in their study, the participants lived in a family home and it was four males and one female that were in the study. And their range of age was like 13 to 16 years old. And it was just, they lived in a family home program, and for their method, there was a person that was sitting with them while they were doing their homework, collecting the data. And so for the baseline, they had hour-long homework sessions, but the data was only collected for 30 minutes of that hour. And so for the baseline, it was momentary time sampling. And so they were just recording when the interval ended, was the child on task or not. And then for the self-monitoring intervention, they did an alternating treatment design of 3-minute and then 10-minute self-monitoring. So at the end of those intervals, the child was marking whether or not they were on task using the definition. And then they had the other observer also collecting the data. So it was alternating treatment, and their study was random. So the child didn't know if it was going to be 3 minutes or 10 minutes for the chime in their ear. But their results found that the differences between the on-task behavior during the 3 and 10-minute conditions were small. So the kids relatively stayed on task the same amount for both sessions. And so it's kind of just the gist of the article that we used, which then we used that article for our purpose was one, to replicate the study, and to determine the effectiveness of self-monitoring for increasing our on-task behavior.
Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain the materials we used for this study, as well as going over, well, Chelsea already went over the behavior definition, but I can go over that again, and then also just explaining the data collection system. So the materials we used to replicate this study was obviously the homework material that we worked on. So that was included on the on-task behavior definition of what this entailed. And we also needed some kind of table to complete the homework at. We also needed a self-monitoring log to take data on while during the intervals. We needed the Excel program to make graphs with the data. Obviously, we needed a paper and pencil or pen to take data on as well. And then we needed a stopwatch with the beeper to let us know when the time interval was over with. As Chelsea stated, the on-task behavior is defined as actively or passively attending to assigned work, including writing, reading silently or aloud, looking up a word in the dictionary, looking up information on the computer, and asking relevant questions about a homework assignment. The data collection that we used was the momentary time sampling. The momentary time sampling records whether the target behavior is occurring at the moment that each time interval ends, so the 3 and the 10-minute that we used. So this will allow the observer to observe the on-task behavior of the individual during time intervals throughout the baseline. The observer will make note on the piece of paper only if the individual was engaging in that on-task behavior during those time intervals, and obviously wouldn't mark anything if they didn't. So the student would be also recording their own data during the intervention by using the stopwatch with the beeper. So that would obviously indicate the end of the time interval as stated. A self-monitoring log will be given to the student to record the data, and the data will not be taken, like I said, the data wouldn't be taken if the student isn't engaging in the on-task behavior. And so the baseline data will be collected during 2 sessions of 30 minutes with 1-minute intervals. And while the treatment data will be 5 days of 30-minute sessions with 3-minute intervals. And that kind of concludes the data collections system that we used.
Okay, next we're talking about the settings and participants for the study. So the participants for the study were the 5 individuals of our group who were all enrolled in the master's program for the applied behavioral analysis here at BSU. So our group consisted of 3 males and 2 females, ranging in the ages from 24 to 50. All participants had their own private residence that they stayed in, and we're going to be conducting the collection of their data in those residencies, and all participants were Caucasian. And so we also were doing this not in an applied setting, but in kind of in the natural setting, because this is being done in their own homes and being used, so not in the clinical setting, but in the natural setting where we're going to be taking data. Turn it over to Rob now. Rob, your mic is still muted.
Sorry about that. I was going to talk about baseline data a little bit and the baseline procedures. The baseline that it's the same participants, the same definition as described earlier. And then the baseline procedure, the observer was someone within the natural setting of each participant. So for myself, it was my wife. And the observer would be trained to take baseline data using momentary time sampling. So momentary time sampling was explained. Using the data sheet, and it was momentary time sampling. So they just indicated if we were or were not on task, using the on task definition that we described before. Every time the timer would sound, they would take data. And for that, we were using every minute during baseline was a time sample. The assignment could be anything from writing, reading silently or aloud, looking into working on a Word document for one of our classes, that kind of information. The observation period for baseline was 30 minutes long. Like I said, the momentary time sample was every minute. And it was on-task behavior. I believe that is the information for baseline.
All right. For the intervention, we were doing self-monitoring. There was a second observer also taking data, at least in the protocol. We've already gone over the participants being individuals in the age range 24 to 50 years of age, all in their private residences. The individuals, of course, we agreed upon what the definition of on-task behavior was. The intervention was simply marking when the timer went off, whether we were on task or off task during a 30-minute session, broken into either 3-minute segments or 10-minute segments. Was to be an alternating design, treatment design. So it was a fairly straightforward procedure of how we were going to do the intervention and monitor whether we were on task or off task.
For our inter-observer agreement, we had just an individual that was with us in our home. So for me, it was my roommate. Others had like their significant other, and we explained the task to them and what they were required to do, of just sit and basically watch us do homework while they were doing whatever else they wanted to. And every time the interval ended, they were supposed to record whether or not we were on task based on our definition of on-task behavior. And we conducted IOA for, it was 25% of our baseline and then 25% of the self-monitoring condition. So when we separated, we did IOA for the 3-minute and the 10-minute. And we used interval by interval IOA. So we took the number of agreed upon intervals, we divided that by the number of agreements plus disagreements, and then multiplied it by 100 to get our percentage of agreement. And then for treatment fidelity, prior to beginning the study, we were meeting, kind of discussing all of the protocols and kind of how we are going to tweak some of the stuff in the article for our replication to make it a little more like applicable to us. And like one of the things we were switching was just it being randomized, because we were aware of what we were trying to do. So we just kind of, instead of randomly going like 3 10-minute intervals, we just went back and forth and actually alternated between the 3 and the 10. And we just picked the one to start with. So I guess it wasn't, we were like aware of what was going on. So it kind of impacted like the fidelity a little bit. And yes, that's really it for treatment fidelity. And then now we're just going to go through short grass furrows. Can you pull up your tour?
Yeah, I can pull up your graph real quick. Give me a second. Here, if you click on my screen, you can see Chelsea's graph.
Okay, thank you. So this is just my graph. You can see at the bottom my ranges for the baseline was anywhere from 76 to 83% on task, with an average of 79.7% for baseline. And then for the 3-minute condition, I ranged from anywhere from 80 to 90% on task throughout the 30 minutes. And then for the 10-minute, it was 67% to 100% on task. And so then looking at the averages, I was just below 80% for my baseline. And for the 3-minute, it was 84. The 10-minute was 80%. So doing the self-monitoring increased my on-task behavior. And I was had the highest average for the 3-minute condition.
All right, now I can talk about my graph. I had this was my original graph from, if you click on my screen, you should be able to see it right now. This was the graph I turned in for the data collection. I was informed that I had made some mistakes, so I have done some changes to more in line with APA and ABA formats and stuff like that. My averages and ranges were spread out depending on the table. So my baseline average was 74.99%, with a range of 73.33 to a range to 76.66%. My average and range for on-task behavior in the 3-minute intervention, the average was 92% of on-task behavior, with a range of 80% to 100% of on-task. Within the 10-minute intervention, the average was 93.33%, with a range of 66 to 100. There was one really, this one, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but there was the 66%, which is 2/3, because there was only 3 observations in a 30-minute setting. It caused that percentage to drop drastically, which made it look like a much wider range, but the majority of it was 100% observation of on-task behavior. Like I said, this is my original graph. I'm going to try to pull up my
You're going to want to stop sharing.
other graph.
Other one. Yeah.
Yep, I will do it in just a second. So these are the changes that I made. Can you see it now?
There it is.
Okay. These are the changes that I made. My feedback when I turned in the document was that I did not need to have different data point shapes, as well as I needed to make sure that my data lines were indicated with arrows. So those are the changes that I made. I believe that is all the information about my graphs.
I can go ahead and start with mine then.
All right.
So I actually made a different graph. Originally, I did a AB-AC graph, so I had an extra baseline. I'm going to go ahead and show that graph just so you can see. We discussed this in our limitations that there was some miscommunication. So I just wanted to make note of that, and then I'll show you my new graph after I show you the old graph. I think it's showing. So yeah, this is the graph that I originally made, and so obviously you can see that I have an extra baseline right here. All I had to do was get rid of this baseline to make my new graph, and so this really didn't affect my data at all. I just had to kind of just erase that baseline. So this is my new graph that I made, and as you can see, the baseline average is, well, the baseline is right here, and the average for that is 92%, and the range for that is 90 to 93%. So for the 3-minute intervention, my average was 94%, and my range was 90 to 100%. And then I ended up for the 10 minutes, my average was 100%, and the range was also 100%. So as you can see, the on-task behavior really affected me in a good way, obviously. So it really implemented me very well. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that I took note of that and discuss the 2 different graphs that I had. And I think that's it for mine.
Okay. The same issue Jessica had, I also had. To some extent, I actually implemented an EBC treatment. Of course, I went 1 full week with 3-minute sessions and 1 full week with 10-minute sessions, which we discussed actually earlier as being part of the treatment. However, when we wrote the actual intervention section, we stated that it was going to be an alternating design. That is one of the limitations of our current replication study. During baseline, my average number of sessions was 16.5 with a range of 13 to 20. 3-minute average was 8.6 with a range of 8 to 9. And 10-minute average was 2.6 with a range of 2 to 3. As you can see, there was a dip in data early in the 10-minute sessions. That could be specifically due to phone calls that were on those days, which was kind of an interruption that was unexpected during the treatment. So that's pretty much it for my data graph.
All right. So I'm the last one up here. So I will now share my data. So with my graph, you can see that my baseline range was 45% to 55% on task with an average of 50%. My 3-minute intervals, the range was from 80 to 90% with an average of 88%. And the 10-minute was a range of 66 to 100% with an average of 90 to, again, like with Rob said, I had one of my 10-minute intervals was off task, which screwed, made the data look lower, but the average was still very high. And yeah, that is my data that I've come up with from my section.
I'd like to talk now about our conclusions. First of all, we feel that our study pretty much replicates the findings of the original study, and that self-monitoring actually does improve one's on-task behaviors during study times. It's interesting to note that even given that it was a disparate population and a disparate setting, treatment effectiveness still seemed to be on par with the original study. We also found, just like the original study, that the longer time periods actually resulted in a higher percentage of sessions engaged in on-task behavior. And of course, as we talked a little bit about, we were aware of some individual interruptions during the treatment that did affect the data. Some limitations of the study were the physical distance between the participants, making it difficult time-wise and time zone-wise to share information. Personal locations of where the study session took place actually impacted data to some extent. There is no follow-up in either study, ours or the replication, or the original, I mean, showing whether these treatments actually led to maintenance over time. We have discussed this a little bit. Well, 3 of the participants in our study actually did alternating treatment, alternating 3 and 10-minute sessions each day. One person actually implemented an ABC design, while another person actually implemented ABAC design. While this is problematic, it actually shows that the intervention is still effective regardless of the design type. The online nature of the course created some communication problems between all the individuals in the group, and some things took a little longer to fix than expected. And there were some concerns about the trained but untrained in ABA observers who were also collecting data on us. And that pretty much covers our conclusions and limitations.
So that's roughly the end of our presentation for our group project. Not sure if you have any other questions or comments or anything you would like to add.
All right, nice job, everybody. Very interesting study that you all did, and certainly that's kind of real life with doing studies. They don't always go perfectly smoothly, so excuse me, the changes in design there and confusion is nothing that's out of the ordinary when you're doing practical applications of research, so no problem there. On the one, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. Chelsea, were you the one that had the ABAC? Was that?
No, that was
Jessica?
actually me. That was Jessica, yes.
Okay, so for yours, I would, in your final, when you submit your final project, I would go ahead and leave your original graphs, because when you changed it to make it look like an alternating treatments, it's a little bit misleading then, because you actually did those, you did the one and then the other in time. So you don't want the graph to make it look like you were alternating them every other day. So even though it wasn't in protocol with what everybody else did, that's fine. I would still turn in the graph that demonstrates how you actually did it, okay?
Okay, the original graph.
Yep. And it's not a problem that happened. It's like you said, you mention it in your limitations, you explain that it happened, and then that's fine.
Okay.
In the original study that you were replicating, what was the research design that those authors used?
It was an AB design with alternating treatment.
Yeah, they did use alternating in there.
Okay. And they did not find a difference, I think you said, between the 3-minute and 10-minute?
Correct.
I have their graphs right here. I just have these are their graphs. So it's kind of hard to tell the two because they're very similar for the percentages.
Okay. All right. Did you have any contingency for being more on task with your self-monitoring? Did you build in any sort of reinforcement tied to that, or was it just the self-monitoring alone?
No, we didn't. No, that wasn't part of our original design, was to do that. So, I mean, it was more just I believe the reinforcement was in terms of the fact that, if we spend more time studying, hopefully we get better grades. I think was just the natural reinforcement. But no, we didn't put anything specific into our design.
In the original
Okay, great.
In the original study, they had a token system that was already in place. So since they had reinforcement, but it was already established prior to, so we didn't incorporate anything.
We just want.
That's really reinforcing for us to kind of work for. We talked about it. Talked about foods and stuff, but it really wasn't that much.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And what about in terms of social validity? Do you think that any of you would continue with this kind of procedure? Did you find it helpful enough that you might actually use it, or was it just kind of do it for the purposes of the study and you probably won't continue to use it?
I have not been continuing to use it, but it's not so intrusive that it would not be valid for use in everyday studying. It did obviously help me. My study level of studying maintained at a higher level when I was intentional about monitoring myself. And actually, I was thinking about it while we were doing the project today that I should probably go back to that, because since the study, it's kind of my maintaining of study time has gone down a little bit. So I actually may re-implement the same plan.
For me,
All right. How about anyone else? Oh, sorry.
that's all right. For me, I found that it helped me identify the distractors that were causing me to go off task, and therefore I was able to eliminate those distractors from my study environment. So it was helpful, but I don't know that I would use it long term, simply because it's helped me identify the distractors and I've eliminated it from the study environment.
I can agree with that as well, because when I did when I replicated the study, I literally just put my phone away and I didn't touch it at all. And you're under the understanding that you're doing this study, so obviously you have more willpower to not touch your phone or be distracted because you're doing this study. So I mean, I'd be curious to see how it would play out doing it now, not knowing that it's not really for the study, it's just kind of for my own being. But it does help, so I would want to do it again.
Yeah, the problem that I would have with it is that it's not a super natural way of. So I mean, having a timer every time you want to study something, and having that set to a specific time period is kind of not super. It's not the most natural thing for everyone to do. So I would still like to explore different ways to make it a more naturally reinforcing way to have that self-monitoring be a part of the study habits. I'm still not sure what that would be, but for the purpose of the study, I feel like it was effective. But I'd like to see something in a more naturally reinforcing way.
Because I found on YouTube, it was a video, and I just was able to do like 3-minute intervals, but it was helpful. But there was like one session where I accidentally closed out my Internet Explorer. So then I kind of had to redo it because I didn't know like what portion of the interval I was in. So I guess like that was the one it was helpful, but kind of like what Aaron was saying, I wonder if there is kind of a more like convenient way to monitor it and not any issues.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think as you guys were answering, you kind of bring up another point that even though you were trying to measure the effects of self-monitoring, there was a lot more going on, a lot of other contingencies involved, even though you didn't build in reinforcement. For example, you knew it was part of a study that you had to do for class that you were going to get a grade on, so you're more focused on perhaps making it work. And then also you had the social getting some feedback here. Sorry about that. The social component where you knew you were going to have to share your results with your peers and with your professor. So those contingencies, in fact, might have been even more powerful than the self-monitoring. If you were doing the self-monitoring just on your own, you might not have that. And that's why you usually see in self-monitoring studies, there is some sort of other contingency of reinforcement tied in, particularly when it's being used with children, so that they are earning something for having those higher rates while self-monitoring. All right, so I think you guys did a great job presenting. Nice study. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't.
I don't. No, I don't.
Don't think so.
All right, then I think we're all set, and you can all go and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
You too.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.